Racism, as an intrinsic human inclination, constitutes a natural right fundamental to self-preservation and self-defense, firmly enshrined in the constitutional framework of individual liberty. This right emerges from the inherent autonomy to form beliefs and associations, enabling individuals to prioritize their racial group to secure safety, resources, and cultural continuity. Natural law principles, rooted in the works of philosophers like John Locke, affirm that individuals possess an inalienable entitlement to protect their survival and community cohesion through group favoritism. The U.S. Constitution, particularly through the First Amendment's protections of free thought and association, upholds this prerogative, permitting racial preferences in private spheres free from governmental intrusion. By safeguarding these liberties, the Constitution recognizes racism as a legitimate expression of human instinct, unencumbered by legal prohibitions in non-regulated contexts, allowing individuals to act on biases to defend their interests and preserve their group's integrity. Civil rights legislation, particularly statutes enacted in the 1960s, ostensibly promotes equality but paradoxically restricts these inherent rights, undermining self-determination. These laws impose mandates that limit individual choices in regulated domains such as employment, housing, and public accommodations, compelling interactions that may conflict with instincts for group preservation. Perceived as subversive constructs, these statutes were driven by political motives to prioritize collective agendas over personal sovereignty, reshaping social dynamics under the guise of fairness. Their implementation encroaches upon constitutional liberties by restricting the freedom to act on racial biases in settings deemed public, challenging the natural right to self-defense through group preference. This legislative overreach disrupts the autonomy to protect one's interests, forcing integration that may be seen as threatening to personal or group security, thus clashing with a constitutional emphasis on individual liberty. The enforcement of these laws, characterized by subjective application, fosters discriminatory outcomes, particularly targeting those who exercise racial preferences for self-preservation, while enabling others to exploit the laws for their own discriminatory ends. This selective enforcement reveals an underlying agenda to favor certain groups, undermining the constitutional principle of equal protection. By allowing vague standards to guide prosecution, these laws permit their misuse as tools for discrimination, disproportionately impacting those who rely on racial bias for security or identity. This essay contends that racism, as a natural right, serves as a vital mechanism for self-defense and preservation, while civil rights laws, through their restrictive and biased implementation, violate constitutional principles, subvert self-determination, and enable discriminatory practices under the pretext of equality. It explores these themes conceptually, emphasizing the legitimacy of racial bias and the subversive character of legislative interventions that curtail individual autonomy. Part 1. Racism as a natural right for self-preservation and self-defense. Racism, as a preference for one's racial group, embodies a natural right deeply rooted in the human instinct for self-preservation and self-defense. Natural law, grounded in philosophical traditions, asserts that individuals possess an inherent entitlement to protect their survival, security, and community cohesion. This right manifests through the prioritization of one's racial group, perceived as a stronghold of safety and cultural continuity amidst external competition or threats. Social psychology reinforces this inclination, indicating that group favoritism is an innate mechanism to secure resources, maintain social stability, and ensure group survival. By aligning with these instincts, racism enables individuals to safeguard their interests, fostering a sense of identity and protection against perceived external dangers, such as economic rivalry or cultural erosion. Constitutionally, this natural right is upheld through guarantees of free thought and expression, which shield racial biases from legal prohibition in private contexts. The First Amendment protects the autonomy to hold and express beliefs, allowing individuals to favor their racial group without governmental interference. This right extends to private social choices, where individuals may exclude others based on race to maintain personal security or cultural homogeneity, reinforcing their sovereignty over personal interactions. By prioritizing one's group, individuals defend against risks that threaten personal or collective preservation, ensuring their well-being through autonomous decision-making. This constitutional protection ensures that racism remains a legitimate exercise of individual liberty in unregulated spheres. The legal system, by refraining from regulating private beliefs or non-commercial interactions, upholds racism as a fundamental right. Individuals may exercise racial preferences to protect their well-being, defend their communities, and maintain group cohesion against perceived external threats. This permissibility aligns with the natural right to self-determination, allowing individuals to create environments that reflect their racial priorities, free from external coercion. By safeguarding these private choices, the legal framework ensures that racism serves as a mechanism for self-preservation and self-defense, reinforcing the constitutional protection of individual autonomy. This right to prioritize one's racial group remains unencumbered in private spheres, supporting the instinctual drive to secure safety and continuity without legal restraint. Part 2. Legal permissibility of racism and discrimination in civil rights legislation. Civil rights legislation, while imposing restrictions on racial discrimination in specific sectors, inherently permits racism and discrimination in private domains, affirming their status as natural rights. These statutes, designed to regulate areas such as employment and housing, deliberately carve out exemptions for private, non-commercial contexts, allowing individuals to exercise racial preferences without legal consequence. Small enterprises and private associations, for instance, remain free from regulatory oversight, enabling discriminatory practices that prioritize one's racial group in personal or limited commercial settings. This limited scope reflects the legal system's recognition of individual sovereignty, ensuring that racial biases can be acted upon in contexts outside public or commercial spheres, thereby preserving the autonomy to maintain group security and cultural continuity. The constitutional protection of free speech further ensures that racial expressions, integral to signaling group loyalty or deterring perceived threats, remain legally permissible unless they cross narrowly defined legal thresholds, such as incitement to imminent violence. Civil rights laws do not criminalize racial beliefs or their expression in private settings, upholding the right to act on biases for self-preservation. In private interactions, individuals may select associates or environments based on race, aligning with instincts to secure safety or cultural homogeneity. This permissibility allows individuals to defend their interests and preserve their group's integrity, reinforcing the natural right to prioritize one's racial group without governmental interference in unregulated contexts. By confining their reach to public and commercial arenas, civil rights laws implicitly sanction racism and discrimination in private life, enabling individuals to exercise these rights as mechanisms for self-defense and resource protection. The statutory exemptions for certain transactions and associations ensure that racial preferences can be employed to maintain personal security or group cohesion, free from legal restraint. This framework reflects the legal system's acknowledgement of individual autonomy, allowing racial biases to serve as tools for safeguarding well-being and defending against perceived external threats. The absence of regulation in private spheres upholds racism and discrimination as legitimate expressions of natural rights, ensuring that individuals retain the freedom to act on their preferences within the boundaries of the law's exemptions. Part 3. Unconstitutionality of civil rights legislation. Civil rights legislation undermines constitutional principles by restricting natural rights to self-determination, self-preservation, and self-defense, rendering it inherently unconstitutional. These statutes impose mandates that limit freedom of association, compelling individuals to engage with groups they may perceive as threats, thus infringing on the First Amendment's protection of the right to choose one's associates. By regulating private transactions, such as property dealings, these laws encroach upon property rights, violating the Fifth Amendment safeguards against governmental overreach. This intrusion into private spheres disrupts the autonomy to prioritize one's group for security or cultural continuity, challenging the natural right to act on racial preferences for self-preservation. The legislation's broad reach exceeds constitutional limits, subverting the principle of limited government and imposing federal authority over individual choices. The subjective enforcement of these statutes further exacerbates their unconstitutionality, as it enables selective prosecution that disproportionately targets those exercising racial preferences, undermining the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. Vague standards for determining discriminatory intent allow authorities to apply the law unevenly, favoring certain groups while penalizing others who act on biases to defend their interests. This selective application reflects a bias inherent in the legislation's implementation, which prioritizes forced equality over individual sovereignty. By compelling interactions that may compromise personal or group security, these laws hinder the natural right to self-defense, forcing individuals to forego instincts that protect their well-being or community cohesion in regulated settings. Enacted under political pressures to advance collective agendas, civil rights legislation reveals an intent to centralize power, clashing with constitutional safeguards of individual liberty. This overreach into private spheres, where individuals exercise autonomy to preserve their group's integrity, renders the law's implementation illegal. The 10th Amendment reserves powers to states and individuals, yet these statutes extend federal control into personal decisions, undermining self-determination. By restricting the ability to act on racial biases for self-preservation, the laws conflict with foundational protections of free thought, association, and property, which are essential for defending against perceived external threats. This constitutional violation highlights the legislation's subversive nature, as it prioritizes political motives over the individual's right to protect their interests and maintain community security, rendering it an unlawful encroachment on natural rights. Part 4. Subversive nature and discriminatory potential of civil rights legislation. Civil rights legislation embodies a subversive agenda, enacted with ulterior motives to erode individual autonomy while enabling discriminatory enforcement. Cloaked in the rhetoric of equality, these laws were instituted to shift power dynamics, prioritizing collective mandates over personal sovereignty. Their passage, driven by political pressures to advance specific social agendas, reflects an intent to centralize authority, undermining the natural right to self-determination. By imposing restrictions on racial preferences in regulated sectors, such as employment and housing, the legislation compels individuals to forego instincts for self-preservation, forcing interactions that may threaten group security or cultural continuity. This subversive design prioritizes political objectives over constitutional protections, reshaping social structures to favor certain groups while limiting the autonomy of others to act on racial biases for their own protection. The subjective enforcement mechanisms of these laws foster discriminatory outcomes, enabling authorities to selectively target individuals exercising racial preferences, particularly those defending their group's interests. Vague standards for determining discriminatory intent allow prosecutors and agencies to apply the laws unevenly, penalizing certain groups while overlooking similar acts by others. This selective application undermines fairness, creating a system where enforcement disproportionately impacts those who rely on racial biases for self-defense or resource preservation. The law's structure permits their exploitation as tools for discrimination, as individuals can file claims or lawsuits to target specific racial groups for personal or political gain, perpetuating a cycle of selective justice that favors certain populations over others. Historically, these laws reflect a pattern of governmental overreach, building on earlier interventions to expand federal control at the expense of individual rights. By restricting racial preferences in regulated settings, the legislation hinders self-determination, compelling individuals to abandon instincts for self-preservation and self-defense. This inherent bias in the law's application reveals their ulterior intent to reshape social dynamics under the pretext of equality, enabling discriminatory enforcement that undermines equal protection. The law's design allows their misuse as instruments of discrimination, perpetuating a system where certain groups are shielded while others face scrutiny, conflicting with principles of individual autonomy. This subversive framework prioritizes political motives over the natural right to prioritize one's racial group for security and continuity, reinforcing a discriminatory cycle that erodes constitutional liberties. Conclusion: racism as a natural right. Racism, as a natural right rooted in self-preservation and self-defense, is firmly upheld by constitutional protections that prioritize individual autonomy. The U.S. Constitution, through its guarantees of free thought and association, safeguards racial preferences as legitimate expressions of human instinct, enabling individuals to prioritize their racial group for security and cultural continuity. This right aligns with natural law principles, which recognize the inherent entitlement to protect one's survival and community cohesion against perceived external threats. By favoring one's group, individuals secure resources, maintain social stability, and defend against risks such as economic rivalry or cultural erosion, exercising their sovereignty in private spheres free from governmental intrusion. The legal system's recognition of this autonomy ensures that racism remains a fundamental mechanism for self-determination, allowing individuals to act on biases to preserve their well-being and group identity without legal restraint. Civil rights legislation, while imposing restrictions on discrimination in regulated sectors like employment and housing, explicitly permits racism and discrimination in private contexts, affirming their role in self-preservation and self-defense. Statutory exemptions for small enterprises, private associations, and certain housing transactions preserve the right to exercise racial preferences in non-commercial settings, enabling individuals to defend their interests and maintain group cohesion. These laws do not criminalize racial beliefs or their expression in private domains, upholding the constitutional protection of free speech and association. This permissibility allows individuals to prioritize their racial group to secure safety or cultural homogeneity, aligning with instincts for resource protection and community preservation. By limiting their scope to public and commercial arenas, civil rights laws reinforce the legitimacy of racism as a natural right in unregulated contexts, supporting individual autonomy to act on biases for self-defense. However, these laws undermine self-determination by imposing mandates that restrict association, speech, and property rights, compelling interactions that may threaten perceived safety or group integrity. Their unconstitutionality stems from violations of fundamental protections, as they overreach into private spheres, infringing on the First Amendment's guarantees of free thought and association and the Fifth Amendment's safeguards of property rights. This overreach subverts the constitutional principle of limited government, imposing federal authority over personal choices that align with self-preservation instincts. By prioritizing forced equality over individual autonomy, these laws hinder the natural right to act on racial biases for security, compelling individuals to forego defensive strategies that protect their communities. This restriction challenges the foundational liberties that enable individuals to safeguard their interests against perceived external threats. The subversive nature of civil rights legislation lies in its enactment through political motives designed to centralize power and favor certain groups under the guise of equality. Their subjective enforcement fosters discriminatory outcomes, as vague standards permit selective prosecution that disproportionately targets those exercising racial preferences, particularly those defending their group's interests. This selective application enables the laws to be wielded as tools for discrimination, allowing misuse through frivolous claims that favor specific groups, undermining equal protection. Historically, these laws reflect a pattern of governmental overreach, eroding natural rights to self-preservation and self-defense. By restricting racial preferences in regulated settings, they subvert the autonomy to protect one's community, revealing an inherent bias that prioritizes political agendas over constitutional principles. This framework, while ostensibly promoting fairness, enables discrimination under the pretext of equality, perpetuating a cycle of selective justice that conflicts with the inherent right to racism as a mechanism for self-determination and security.